Great. Now you mentioned some of the people that influenced you early on, Gene and Targets. Anybody else at that time who?
Well, Al Schultz was the Grand Lodge rep assigned to Boeing, and I worked with him. In 1970, I was elected union rep, and at that time, it was just at the peak, and then, of course, the company had what they call the big layoff. So between 1970 and 1972, the company went from 100,000 to 30,000 people. And during that period, I was the union rep, and the hardest thing was to have an office full of people who had just gotten laid off and, wanting help. And there's not much you can really do for them. We had to make sure that they had been properly in the proper seniority order and properly classified and that kind of thing. But overall, it was just bad. So then the really bad day for me came in 1972 when the international president, Red Smith, came out to Seattle, and he said, well, you've lost more than half your membership. Now you're going to have to lay off half your union reps. And I was in the new half, so I got laid off from the union job. So I went back to work in quality control, and they said that you will have 1 day of work and then you'll be laid off because your job in quality control, the seniority is well beyond where you are. And I said, well, is there another job for me? And they said, well, they went through the list. They said, you have enough seniority to get on a grade 2 storekeeper. I said, I'll take it. So then I got a job in the world's largest garage sale. The entire Renton factory was full of used machinery, used office furniture, used equipment, and it was a garage sale. And I worked in there loading. People would come in with a pickup truck and buy an old lathe or a drill press for pennies, and I'd help load it into the truck, and away they go. So I was there about a year, and then one day the supervisor from quality control came in. He said, what are you doing here? I said, well, I work here. So the next day he called me up. He said, come on back. So I got called back to quality control, and I worked there basically ever since. But I stayed active in the union. I was back on the, I ran for a union rep, but the 7 incumbents ran against the 7 that got laid off, so. So I was not reelected. So then I ran for district council, and I was elected to that. And second career, I was on the legislative committee. And between 1970 till 1990, almost every year, 1 week we would go to Washington, D.C. to lobby, with the, and also during the legislature in Olympia, we would be down there during the session quite often. So I did a lot of legislative lobbying, both in the state capitol and in the federal capitol, and I wrote a lot of resolutions. I think I went to 5 Grand Lodge conventions over that whole period of time. And
Grand Lodge conventions every 4 years, right?
yeah.
Wow.
And was a delegate. We, the one in Atlanta, 1988, I led the fight to get the permission to have all our records stored electronically. A lot of the smaller lodges in the country, they still insisted everything be put in these little books and written down. We said, hey, join the 20th century at that time. And it was in the Constitution that the international that it had to be, on paper. So we did get that removed. And it was a fight. I was on the floor, and we had committee meetings and all that, but they made it. And we said, it's voluntary. You don't have to do it. So finally it passed. So I'm sure that they all do it electronically now.
I would hope so.
Yeah. But so that was one fight we were in. When I was a union rep, one thing I did get through, when they were laying people off, they would lay people off and then they would call them back. So a guy would be laid off, he'd go out and get another job or do something. the company would call him back. He quit the second job and come back. He'd work 3 days and then he'd lay him off again. And so I went with Al Schwartz and we went into the company and said, you know, let's be reasonable. Somebody is trying, because if you don't do that, then you lose all your seniority for recall rights. So at least if you call somebody back, guarantee them 30 days work. So that passed. That was a midterm correction of the contract, which is very unusual.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And it's still in the contract. So if you get laid off and call back, they have to guarantee you 30 days work at least.
Mm-hmm.
Not this 1 day at a time bullshit. So I did do that. Getting all the stewards pissed off at me, and at least I got the laid off people. No, I don't think the stewards weren't all mad at me. Another thing, and this also with Jerry, that we instituted a training for stewards. And Tom Baker was involved in that too. But we went, you know, early on to these, the International would have training classes, you know, in the summer, 1 week Machinist Leadership School.
Mm-hmm.
So we would go to that, and then we'd come back, and I said, you know, we need to do this for all of our stewards. And we had like I don't know what it is now, there's something like 4,000 stewards. We can't send them all to leadership school, but we can have training classes here. And we did. And I think they still do that too. And new stewards have to go through a training period, go over the contract and, you know, the whole thing, how to meet, talk to your officers and all that. So I worked on that too.
Now, let's go back to the legislative committee. Was that an appointed position, or?
Yeah, you were elected to the district council. It's about 35 members, and then it's a committee of the council. So it's a sort of a people on the council are in different committees, financial committee, stewards committee, and I was agitated for and got the legislative committee, which I enjoyed being on the legislative committee, and I think we did a lot of good work on that.
And I think that's kind of changed over the years too. Now it's more the political director and the legislative committee go down to Olympia. I believe they may still be on district council, but I'm not sure.
Oh yeah, I think so. When we first started, we didn't have a legislative director, and the committee itself, and of course we were working in the shop. We got paid when we lost time to go down there. They would make up the lost time, but we didn't get paid for being on the legislative committee per se. So like I say, we got lost time. But once again, I don't know the exact date. Somewhere probably in 1985, the district hired a legislative director. But technically, the director works for the district president and the council, in theory, and that the legislative committee and the district council is actually the final judgment, and I think it still is.
Yeah.
Now, the legislative director, Larry Brown, today, he's full-time, so he's able to devote his time to all that. But I'm pretty sure he has to make his recommendations and go through the legislative committee for the official. And it works together, you know, it does work. I mean, it's not like there's antagonism or any empire building or anything.